Back again. It's Tuesday, which means that it is six rotations day here in the fall. And alongside Mick Haley, I'm Daniel Gilman. Happy to be with you all. And Mick, we've got a fun show today. There was a couple really exciting matches. Most excitingly, of course, SMU against Pittsburgh, the double bash, as we will chat with SMU's outside hitter Maya Tabron at the end of the episode. Very, very excited to get to the chat, our first interview here this season. Meanwhile, as always, our show is brought to you by SNA Sports, better equipment for the better game. And Mick, off the top, what are we feeling? How was the week for you and kind of watching throughout? It was a really exciting week. I had some ACC volleyball that I got to call. I got to see some really exciting teams and continue to watch. Nebraska Purdue was a really fun match. What was your highlight?
Yeah, I like Nebraska at Purdue also. I really am interested in watching the last 5 points of sets now. It seems like the teams that are defining themselves are good at first ball kill at the end of games. We've always talked about the transition game and how you win in the transition game, but the teams that were good in first ball kill are now starting to win the fifth sets because they don't let the other team play and they don't make errors. That's the second thing. So I enjoyed that match a lot. I thought Purdue had their opportunities to win that match. Nebraska, just stayed in there, hung in there until Purdue gave them a free ball there at the end, and they terminated, and that was all it took. But that was a great match. I like anything with the first seven teams in the poll. I've enjoyed all of those matches. It seems like players are getting a little tired right now, so the intensity is hard to bring up. We're not quite at the middle of the season, but we're getting ready for midterms. When we get ready for midterms, you see all kinds of strange things happen. But I don't know what it is. If the national championship was in Dallas at SMU, I would think SMU has a shot at the national championship, the way they perform at home.
Well, we could talk about it first in the field house on Wednesday in Pittsburgh, and the Panthers swept through SMU. And I'll tell you what, listen, I had a lot of people chirping at me. Polls are fun. We like to do rankings. It's fun to shake it up. I had Nebraska as number one last week. Part of it was maybe to try to get a dialogue going to open up the discourse. And I'll tell you what, Nebraska did not look like the best team in the country against Purdue, but they came out victorious. Purdue gave it away a little bit at the service line with their five-set loss to the Huskers. Pittsburgh looked like the number one team in the nation on Wednesday, and then they go to Dallas on Sunday, and it was Saturday, excuse me, and it was a wild fourth set. SMU comes back to take it 25-23. The fifth set, though, was all Mustangs. Purdue comes off the bench, not the Boilermakers, but the outside hitter. And she was so explosive. I think three or four kills in her short stint. SMU had a huge run. I think it was 5-1 run that they went on early in that fifth set. But Mick, Pittsburgh had a massive overpass that they were able to get a block out of that turned it from 9-6 to 8-7 instead. But Natalie Foster closes it out, an ace to win it as the Mustangs seemingly out of nowhere, right? Did you have them on your radar last season in the American? It seems like they kind of come out of nowhere. They've now beaten the two giants in Nebraska and Pittsburgh with a five-set win on Saturday.
No, I think their coaching staff has put it together. They're doing a nice job. The players believe. Um, I watched the coaches for SMU during the 3-0 sweep at Pittsburgh, and I didn't see any serious panic by them. And I thought that was strange until Saturday's match, and then I could see that they absolutely had a focus to win at home, and probably would have liked to have won at Pittsburgh also, but the Panthers are pretty tough at home, as are a lot of teams. So I think you have to give credit to the SMU coaching staff. In fact, all of Dallas is Baylor assistants that have now head coaches, with TCU's Williams being from the Baylor program and the SMU coach being from the Baylor program. They both have done nice jobs with their programs and got themselves in the top 20. It's pretty exciting, actually.
5 aces from Natalie Foster, 11 kills from Tabron, who we'll talk to later, 20 from Nia Shamay. And as we mentioned, Natalie Purdue comes off the bench, goes 4-1-10. Purdue, who was an AAC honoree a year ago, certainly is not a nothing, but she only had 7 swings coming into that match, Mick. What a tremendous story to kind of rally around there as Pitt SMU, Nebraska Purdue headline what was a very, very fun week. A little bit of a recap on what happened with that Nebraska Purdue match. Nebraska had to win the fourth after Purdue took the second and the third. It was 25-22. The serving certainly cost Purdue, but their outside hitters continue to be the best in the country. Hudson and Chacoin combined for 48 kills. Beeson gets 22. How about Harper Murray on serve receive? That's something that I kind of noticed. So I went into the stats. She received 50 serves with just 1 reception error as the Huskers. You know what? Let's look at it now. Nebraska will stay put in the 2 spot. Pitt relinquishes, but able to hold on to that 1 spot with Penn State and a gritty win over Indiana. Louisville with a wild 5-setter on Friday against Florida State. And Mick, I think we're feeling a lot better about our opinion that it's really just 2 teams and then there's a gap and then everyone else. But this week could change things because we're going to be able to see Pitt and Stanford matching up on Sunday.
Yeah, that's a good one for me to watch. I really need to see where Stanford really is. I thought they should have been better in September because they weren't in school. They're in school now. They started, I think, October 2nd or October 3rd, somewhere in there. And now they're actually studying and not just training. So that will be a great match to see. And the late start sometimes helps you a lot because you can travel and not worry about studying, but it also loads up on you when you get right into the middle of the season against everybody else. So that I think everybody should tune into that one for sure.
Well, let's go through a few other of the highlights. Louisville also had a tight one against Miami over the weekend and beat them in 4. I believe that was on Sunday. Meanwhile, as we move forward through this top 10, before we give you the rest of it, Texas had a primetime showcase against Kentucky, and it was a 3-set blowout on ESPN on Sunday. The SEC is really not impressing me aside from Texas. Where do you feel the SEC is sitting right now, aside from the Longhorns?
Yeah, I feel that the majority of the teams are back to the middle of the pack. And I see with Florida losing, I mean, it's just Texas at the top of the SEC. And what would it be like if Texas hadn't gone to the SEC this year? I mean, look at that. I think the SEC wouldn't have had a team maybe in the top 15.
Yeah.
Um, and that's unusual, but that's kind of where it is right now, in my opinion. And LSU had a nice comeback win this weekend, but they're not top 20 material at this point. There are upsets. A&M got beat. I thought they were going to come on, and they've seemed to not be able to handle it. So I don't know where the SEC is. I think Texas is going to maybe have to carry that conference again. And I would say this about Texas. Their 6-2 now seems to be favoring system by the players because Rutherford only had 1 kill in the first couple of sets of that match. And the other right side, Devin, and I can't pronounce her last name. It's a nice Hawaiian name, but Devin had 7 or 8 kills in the first 2 sets. They're going to the right sides a lot now, something different than they have been. And then Singletary, the middle blocker, is starting to get set more and more, and she seems more comfortable and is not making those hitting errors. So I really think Texas is on the way up. I mean, I see them as finding themselves right now. I think Creighton is still there and invisible because they don't have top 25 teams to play. And that's good. We're going to find out how Stanford looks this weekend. And Penn State did survive Indiana. Did you see how close those scores were? So, there's going to be some battles in the Big Ten yet.
Yeah, very tight match there. Penn State is going to match up with Minnesota on Sunday. Now, there are not a ton of ranked versus ranked this week, but they are juicy. Starts off Wednesday on ACC Network at 7 o'clock Eastern, Stanford at SMU. So the continual barrage of top 10 teams continues for the Mustangs. They've already knocked off three of them. Can they continue to battle through as Stanford SMU on Wednesday? And then you fast forward to Utah BYU on Saturday. And then Sunday, Minnesota Penn State at 2 o'clock, Stanford Pittsburgh at 3 o'clock on ESPN. So those are the top matches for the upcoming week. We can also get to the rest of our top 25 now. And as we look at it, SMU jumps up 3 spots. I'm surprised it's not more. I personally, in our media poll, brought SMU all the way up to number 5 because they deserve it. And that's just how I feel. But I guess the 4 losses and the fact that coach don't necessarily watch these matches, and that's where the coaches poll comes from, has SMU with their best ranking in program history at 12. Meanwhile, Utah jumps in as they swept through TCU and Baylor. Is there anything that kind of irks you about this top 25 here? Florida drops down from 19 to 23. They were upset by South Carolina, as Washington is the only team to fall out.
Well, in polls, you don't like it when everything's stagnant, and there's not much movement in that middle group from Kansas, Wisconsin, Purdue, Oregon, SMU, Arizona State, Minnesota, Kentucky. They keep kind of hanging in that group. They beat each other up. And so there's not much movement. You have to watch Utah. They're on the move up right now. That's another team that had a really good weekend. So that BYU match this weekend is we're gonna see where BYU really is because Utah's playing really well right now. Baylor seems to be on the way down. Dayton is stuck because they don't have any quality competition that's ranked, so they can beat a lot of good teams and not get credit for it. Auburn, I don't know why Auburn sneaks in there, but I do think that there are several teams. They beat each other up in the SEC down there a lot. I think it's just SEC voting for SEC and hopes to maintain their positions getting into the tournament, but maybe not. Maybe they're doing better than I think. I just haven't seen it.
Well, it could also be a spot where there isn't really a team that deserves to jump them. Arkansas sits in the 26th spot. Washington dropped from 24 to 27. There's not really anybody else that is. I think Virginia was on the precipice with their big wins over Florida State and Miami. I got to see Virginia as they swept Clemson on Friday, but then they were swept by Georgia Tech on Sunday. Georgia Tech, meanwhile, gets some credit for a big win over Virginia, which it really was. Georgia Tech jumps from 20 to 17 despite not having their starting setter, and they've really had to alternate out of the 6-2 offense into a 5-1 that does not quite fit this scheme. Meanwhile, Florida State went up despite losing to Louisville from 21 to 19. I think we're in the station of the year, Mick, where the rankings don't mean that much because we are not in a spot where coaches are watching. It's just that simple. It's hard to tell me that a coach is going to spend their week at all watching a match that doesn't include a team they're about to play. It's as simple as that, which is why the media poll comes into play. So let's go ahead and look at our Volleyball Magazine media poll voted by you and I and a couple other members of the media. 12 total, 7 first place votes go to Pitt, 5 to Nebraska. And this I like a lot. SMU goes into the top 10. I think Kansas deserves a lot of respect. I like Creighton up there as well. What do you feel about that Minnesota, USC, Kentucky down at the bottom? Because I think we're getting into a portion where we're starting to look at who deserves the last few home seeds to host in the tournament.
Yeah, and I'm watching the number of 5-set matches. It seems like there's just a ton of teams playing 5-set matches. SC, one of them, for instance, they play 5 against Minnesota, they play 5 against Michigan, they play 5 against whomever.
UCLA.
Yeah, UCLA, and no
Love
one
that.
seems to take charge of business and run with it. You don't see a lot of 3-0 sweeps, except Oregon then sweeps SC at Oregon 3-0. And that just didn't look like SC played, but Oregon has Collier, and no one else has a player that can take them on their shoulders in that group and just carry them through. So Collier does a lot for Oregon. Batenhorst does a lot for USC right now. In fact, she's the only scorer that you can count on for USC every night to get in double figures. So teams are going to start picking on these players even more, which in the long run makes them better because they're under the heat all the time and they have to produce or their teams can't score enough points to win. Collier, I think, is like that now. She's getting used to, hey, here, bring it on, because I know it's coming. There have been players like that in the past, but if they have a bad night, then the team has a bad night. That's the way I see it. And I like the media poll right up through 9. I think SMU's earned their way up into the top 10, beating two teams. And the funny thing is, they beat them 3-0, 3-0. They beat Nebraska 3-0, and they beat Pitt 3-0. And so,
Hold on. They beat Pitt in 5.
oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I was giving them more credit just beating
I
them,
think
though.
they swept Baylor, though, as well.
They've swept a lot of teams when they've been on their games, so that's interesting. And Purdue, for some reason, loves to play five and then serve into the net in the fifth game. I mean, that's almost an MO. And Georgia Tech, you mentioned, is Jekyll and Hyde of the year. They either show or they don't show, and you just wonder why. It's just a really interesting thing. And Arizona State has just disappeared because they're in the part of their conference where they're playing teams that they're supposed to beat, and you're right, nobody's paying attention. So that's interesting. Minnesota, that's really interesting. I think if they get their other left side back, though, Minnesota takes a jump up here because they're having trouble scoring points also. And if they Hanson's the left side that's really scoring for them, and then they have a void with the other left side. So as soon as they get healthy, I see them doing well. I'm waiting for SC to either break out or crash. I don't know. In the same way with Kentucky, Kentucky cannot score. They've got one player, a sophomore, and everybody's going after her, and she looked scared to death against Texas the other night. So I think she'll get a lot better because she doesn't have any choice. They're just coming after her.
Let's talk a little bit about the Big 12 because as we see on that media poll, Kansas and Arizona State both in the spot to host during tournament time. Kansas swept through West Virginia and Cincinnati. Previous week, 4-set wins over Houston and Colorado. They're in a bit of a spot where they're not playing top talent. This upcoming week, they'll play Kansas State, UCF, then Iowa State. Then finally, you get a top 25 matchup with Utah, but it's really going to be some time. November 6th, Arizona State against Kansas. That should be great. And then Kansas hosts against TCU and Baylor in November, and then BYU as well in that month as Arizona State in the same spot. They beat Arizona and Texas Tech this past week handedly. They'll play Houston on ESPNU, 10 p.m. on Wednesday if you want to see Kevin Barnett, Madison Fitzpatrick on the call there. Some good friends that should be doing a fun broadcast there. But nothing really important for Arizona State until they play BYU and Utah in about 2.5 weeks. So it's hard to keep your sights set on this conference, but to me, it does look like it's them two. And then you have a gap. And then we get into these other teams that had a hodgepodge of a weekend, Mick. Utah swept TCU and Baylor. TCU beat BYU in 5. BYU swept Baylor. They're just going to keep on eating each other. And I think it's going to hurt the cause for the most part. I don't think any of those teams have a chance to host.
Well, it used to be when we had 6 or 7 conferences, the top team, we're following each one of the top teams. Now we've got conferences of 14 to 18 schools in them, and you could be eighth or ninth in that conference and be winning one of the other conferences if you were in it,
Yeah.
and you get far less attention. So these mega conferences are not good for the middle of the group because they seem to disappear because everybody's watching the top 2 or 3. And I was just amazed to look at the Big Ten with 18 schools, and we're talking about the top 4 or 5, and 18 schools, and you don't hear about the bottom 13. And it's pretty interesting.
Well, we try to give as much credit as we can to everyone. Meanwhile, deserving some credit, Nima. Of all of the guesses last week, only one predicted correctly how many sets TCU, BYU, and SMU Pitt would have on that Saturday afternoon. And Nima guessed 10 sets. Both matches went the distance. Nima, your jacket is on the way, so congratulations in order there. Meanwhile, a fun bit of news. Ohio State set their attendance record, and we can't take it for granted. If every week one team can send their attendance record, we can continue to grow the sport in every college town because Ohio State finally, Jen Flynn was finally able to convince the administration to allow them to play a match in the basketball arena, and they were able to set a new volleyball attendance record. Meanwhile, Mick, some fun news. The first RPI official on the NCAA.com came out this past Sunday. Yesterday, we're recording on this Monday. And I wonder if anything pops out to you on the RPI. Now, you guys at home can go and look it up, ncaa.com/rankings/volleyball dash women slash D1, or just Google it. And it's Louisville, Nebraska, Creighton, Pitt. That's the top four. RPI, of course, has to be taken with a bit of a grain of salt, right? Because you've got Auburn at 12, and North Carolina was in the top 10 for a while. They finally fell to NC State, so they dropped out of the top 10. Where do you see RPI as a former coach?
Well, RPI is interesting because they've done a little tweaking to it, and the RPI as the RPI doesn't take into a couple of accounts, but it does reward for scheduling. And I'm not talking about scheduling number one or number two. If you schedule a conference champion from the previous year and that team's doing well, you get a lot of points in the RPI. So the coaches have learned to cherry pick their schedule. And when I say that, I mean they pick off teams that have won their conference. There's some 30 conferences, and preseason, the 4 weeks, if you can play a majority of top three teams from various conferences, your RPI is going to be very high. And that's pretty interesting. And we learned that a long time ago with our scheduling. So, for instance, when I was at USC, we scheduled a tournament with Iowa State, I'm sorry, Northern Iowa, Creighton, Kentucky, and ourselves. All four were one or two in their conferences. Our RPIs shot off the chart, whether we won or lost. And we played three or 4 weeks like that. We were always ranked high going into our conference. So if we didn't get any RPI points in the conference, and especially now, teams are not getting RPI points, or teams are getting more RPI points because the conferences are large and they've had a bunch of matches against the top end of the conference, their RPIs will be up there. Now, the next time the RPI comes out, let's take Auburn, for example. They might have played the top 8 in their conference in this first round. And they go to the end of this next 8 weeks, they might play the bottom 8 teams. Their RPI could drop significantly if they lose and play those teams. So it'll be very interesting to see the second RPI printing.
And one thing that is interesting too, when you look at the RPI, and something that former Penn State assistant coach, former Virginia head coach Dennis Hohenschelt wanted to tweet at us and make sure that we portray that news. And if anyone else has their opinions and wants it to be talked about, I have no issue as long as it's monitored and filtered by me. But this was something important because Mick, last week we talked and we did a little bit of a bracketology, and we'll probably do it again in a few weeks coming up. But something that you mentioned stuck out with a couple people, where you gave a little credit to Boston College for just winning a set against Pittsburgh. But realistically, Boston College is not going to make the tournament. They don't have a chance to make the tournament. If you aren't in the top 85 right now, this is what Coach Hohenschelt thinks. If you're not in the top 85 right now, you're probably needing a bit of a miracle, a 10-match winning streak, or some sort of string of upsets to work your way into the picture. You're going to have a hard time. In my opinion, if you're not in the top 50, then you're going to have a hard time working your way in unless you can go on a run or win the conference tournament, regardless of where you are in your standings, obviously. But when you look at the RPI, and I'm looking at some of these teams, Mick, and I don't want to throw anyone under the bus, but there are certainly some teams here in the 50s even that I'm not sure stand a chance. And so it's interesting it's too early, in my opinion, to really break down who should and shouldn't make it. It's just fun to give everyone a little bit of credit. And that's what we try to do. We try to say, well, they could have a chance, or don't count out blank or so and so. But I thought that was an interesting one because I felt like it was important to try to break down. Because, for example, you look at this RPI, and a team like Ole Miss at 38 is right next to Miami at 37. Miami beat Texas. You got to win like that that's going to carry a lot more weight than maybe scheduling hard like Ole Miss did, where they are certainly not on the bubble or anywhere near the bubble, right?
Yeah, and they probably, I haven't looked at Ole Miss's schedule, but if they were smart in their scheduling, they didn't go to the Big Ten or the ACC or the Big 12 or those conferences. They played people that were tops in their conference in other conferences. And they get just as much credit for playing those teams and beating those teams as they would if they just played top five teams from the four power conferences, so to speak. So yeah, I think it is too early. I was thinking real hard about the 85. Um, with these big conferences now, 85 might not be the top number, maybe a little higher, especially if you had injuries and all the once you get people back and you start beating people 3-0, home and away. The RPI, what is it? The RPI something. There's a second RPI that adds home and away and gives you points for winning on the road and gives you points for winning 3-0. That one's a little bit more accurate and it's more closely associated with the basketball RPI.
Okay. Yeah. Great to keep an eye on. Certainly something that's fun to continue. But for now, we're going to jump away. We're going to wrap things up a little earlier because I do want to give space for our interview with the outside hitter from SMU. So we thank you so much for joining us. Stay tuned with our chat next. Joined now by the SMU outside Maya Tabron, coming off of just an awesome week of volleyball and a great match on Saturday. Maya, you started your career at Colorado. I want to start it off. What was the process like to join the transfer portal, to get down to Dallas? What was the whole situation like for you, and how did it all work out?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think COVID was just like an amazing opportunity, for our class to get that extra year. So I definitely wanted to take that. And with the opportunity, I just wanted to, do something completely different. So I'm originally from California, was in Colorado for a couple years. So I said, hey, why not go somewhere where I haven't been before? So I was really looking when I entered the portal. I was super excited to just start talking to schools, seeing different programs, their coaches, and just like the areas and everything. So I was looking mostly, South, East Coast, Texas, and I had my first call with Coach Sam, and she was just absolutely amazing. Loved her energy. I will say, being in the transfer portal and like going through the recruiting process a second time is so much easier than the first time because, you're not a 16-year-old talking to coaches anymore. Like you've kind of gone through it. So it was really fun, really exciting. I took my visit down here in Dallas right before Christmas time, and I just fell in love with the area, the school, the coaching staff, the girls, and I just knew that it was going to be a perfect fit. So yeah.
So I'm sure every single coach goes into a season and says, "All right, guys, we've got the opportunity to do something special." But was there any sort of feeling, or was it a little bit less expected coming into this year, joining a new conference? I'd love for you to just walk us through, if you could be as candid as possible, kind of like what was the expectations from you guys this season? Was it, all right, let's get one top 25 win, or like, hey, we can really win the ACC?
Yeah, I mean, obviously going into it, we kind of saw who we had set up on this team. We knew we were pretty old. A lot of girls who have been here for a couple of years, but then also these a couple other grad students also came in with me. So I think we expected to, come into these practices and really have a lot of experience on the court and a lot of just knowledge about the game. So I think that was just like the pre of like, hey, this is what we have. Once we started playing, whether that was just like, summer open gyms, but then once we really got in the gym with the coaches, when season started, I think that's kind of when we realized that we had like a really, really special group on our hands. And that went all the way up to all of our grad students, all the way down to our couple of freshmen. And we just have everybody who is here. We say 1 through 14, everybody's here to work hard every single day. We all kind of had this collective goal. And our collective goal this season was on a mission. And that kind of mission would kind of apply to anywhere. That could be for school, that could be for volleyball. But our mission as a team, once we started those games out, we had that crazy win against Nebraska. I think that's kind of where we were like, all right, we can do something really, really special here. And of course, we've always said, like, hey, we want to win the ACC. I think that's the top goal. I don't think you should ever like strive for less than that. So that definitely was something that we talked about in the beginning of the season. And now with that win over Pitt, that's kind of like a reality for us. So we're just working really hard towards that goal every single day. And but it really did start just like from the beginning and start from just seeing, just the roster, just seeing who we had on the team. And then once we were able to come in and build those relationships, it really took off from there.
Go ahead, Mick.
All right, sorry. I thought you froze there. I was looking. Hey, something that always is interesting to me. You guys go into Pittsburgh to play Pitt, and it doesn't go your way, and you're out of there, and now you're going to turn around and play them again right away. I never liked that at all, and yet we've got conferences doing that still to this day. The Sun Belt plays the same team back to back. Some of the other conferences do that. How does that feel as a player, first of all? And secondly, what did it feel like going into Pitt and playing and then knowing you're going to get a second chance at your place?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, my kind of other shared experience, because before this I was Pac-12, so we kind of did that same where it was spread out. But kind of COVID, that was when we kind of got that experience of you are playing a team back to back. And it definitely is weird. It definitely is different. And I mean, it is hard to beat a team twice or I think with COVID, what was different too is that both those home games were a home game or they were both away games. But this opportunity that we had to have a home and then come right back or away and then come right back to a home game, I think was something that we really look forward to. And so, going into Pitt, we obviously knew, number one team, all this talk on NCAA, everybody's super excited to see what they're going to do this season. And they're an absolutely amazing team. So, we kind of went into Pitt and said, hey, we know that we can compete with them, and we just got to work our hardest to do that. And obviously, that did not come out on our side of the net. We did not work our hardest. We did not display what we could display as a team, as individuals, as our coaching staff. So I think once we were able to kind of turn that around and come back to Dallas, that was just our biggest goal, is to say, hey, like, you know what? If we lose, that's expected. But if we win and we actually play our best and we know that we can play our best and we know that we can beat this team, um, that was just what we wanted to do and to have fun and work our hardest at the same time. So I think just that turnaround of, hey, this happened, we had this opportunity, we did not use it, and we did not play our best at Pitt. But we have this second opportunity. We get to do it in our own house with our own fans where we're comfortable. And I think that that's the best part about, this kind of conference change and how they're doing it now is that you do get that second opportunity right away. Versus other games, you might say, hey, we didn't play our best, but you won't play them till next year. So I think that the fact that, they're our travel partner, we got to do that this year was just absolutely amazing. And, we did that the second time. We came home and we just played our hardest and had fun with it. And that's how we were able to knock it off of them. So, yeah.
So in that second match, at what point in the match did you feel like it was going a different direction and you and your teammates probably started looking at each other and saying, yeah. Well, is there
Yeah.
a certain point that you can remember in that match where that started to happen?
Yeah, definitely. I think, the second set where we just started to compete with them and we could kind of see that like we had to make them work harder. Like they really had to like put their foot down and press on the gas to kind of stick with us. And we took that second set off of them. Third was a little bit rocky. I don't think we kind of kept that same energy. But the fourth set and in the fourth, when we all kind of said to each other, like, if we take this to a fifth set, we are winning this. There's absolutely no way that they're going to take this from us. So, I think it was kind of middle of the fourth there. We had some big blocks in that set that really just like pulled us away, brought up the energy, brought the gym and everything all together. So it was definitely in the fourth set that we were all kind of looking at each other like, we're gonna do this. So yeah.
Good, good. Daniel?
Yeah, I think that's when a lot of people started tuning in as well. It was like, okay, like there might be a little bit of magic in the air. Something I like to ask is especially for all of the high school or club volleyball players watching, your season started a little bit rockier and it was
Mhm.
such a high start, right? 25-7 was your first set of the season and things are feeling great. You're in Hawaii. This is a powerhouse team in Hawaii, and then you lose. And you've got to turn that around so quickly before you play Nebraska. Was there a conversation either out on the island or back home that, as you mentioned, Coach Sam kind of gave a lesson or sent a message and something that you can kind of talk to some younger, student athletes or just athletes out there that can kind of say, hey, listen, this is how we got ourselves together because it is a bit of a Cinderella story when you really break it down.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. I think after that Hawaii game, we kind of came in the locker room and it was the typical quiet, nobody really wanted to talk, and then somebody just spoke up and was like, "Hey, we're winning the next one." Like, I think that's really all that you can do at that point because obviously like you said, like it didn't go our way, but we also saw in that game how good we can be and how clean we can play. Like that first set, I think that was some of the best volleyball that I've ever been a part of. So, I think that, that opportunity of seeing, hey, we can do this if we work really hard and we play our best. But then at the same time, if we come into a game and we're not disciplined, we kind of overlook the other team, we can kind of see what happens. So it was just kind of that turnaround of like, hey, you guys, we got to use this as a lesson. I think, every team throughout their season kind of needs that. We might have been the lesson for a couple teams, whether that's Nebraska. I know Nebraska kind of turned it around after us. Maybe Pitt will too. But I think you just have to use that as a lesson and move forward and learn from your mistakes. But then at the same time, you have a whole new match, a whole new set of points that you're going to be working towards next week. So you just got to look forward to that at the same time.
And I think that's what non-con play is really about, right? Kind of finding
Mhm.
yourself as an identity. And not to bring up another tough loss, but same thing happened in LMU, right? You guys won that first set. What is, I guess, a lesson that you learned about winning the first set and then maybe not taking your foot off the gas there with those two non-conference losses?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, you kind of described it perfectly. Like we took our foot off the gas. And um, I think the biggest thing is that you just can't underestimate anybody. Like whether it's non-conference play, we set up those schedules to play tough teams and like pack our preseason, but then at the same time, ACC, like we have what, five, six teams now in the top 25. Like every weekend you're gonna be playing somebody great. And even if you're not playing a top 25 team, like this is still a Power Five conference. Um, so I think with that game specifically, we kind of also learned the fatigue and learning how to play through it because I think we were very tired that game. You could see it on the court, off the court. But at some point that just doesn't really matter. So we kind of had a lot of gas and a lot of go in that first set, and we just dropped off after that. So we really learned and talked about it afterwards about what we can do, like managing our bodies better, our recovery, and what we can do just for the prep side of that. But then also, when you're in those situations, you just got to push through it no matter what. So that was definitely another really good lesson that we learned early in the season.
And it's something that Mick and I like to ask everyone, especially passers, and you're someone that plays all around. Who's been the hardest swing to dig this season so far?
Oh, that's a good question. Hmm. We I mean, Olivia Babcock is ridiculous. Her out of the back row, like there was some balls that I was like, oh, this is coming like right at my chest, and then it ended up 2 feet to my right by my foot. So she just has a ridiculous arm. I would say she's definitely up there. I think who was Nebraska's middle, Andy Jackson. I
Yeah.
think I've said. She has a ridiculous arm too, and she kind of carried them against us as well. Um, and who was the last one? Kentucky's right side. I don't know
Was that
her
Delight?
name. I think so, yeah, where she was used to be a middle but was moved to the right. She had a killer arm swing too. So just kind of different players, but just all were able to like do different things against us, move the ball around and just swing at it. So yeah.
Well, huge one coming up in just a few days. Really wild schedule this Wednesday and then
Mhm.
Sunday, and every single one seems to be, or Wednesday, Saturday, everyone seems to be a top 10. So you've got Stanford on Wednesday. We really appreciate the time.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. It was great talking to you guys.
Thanks, man.
Absolutely. She's Maya Tabron with SMU. For Mick, I'm Daniel, and this is Six Rotations.